All right, Mauricio Pochettino's first ever USMNT roster has dropped this morning. And guys, based on the amount of injuries we have right now, it's probably about what you would expect. To be honest, and we said this a lot during Berhalter's second cycle, right? When people were like, he finally gave you the rosters you want. And we'd say, yeah, the roster kind of picks itself at this point, right? Like the top 20 guys on the roster pretty much pick themselves. We aren't France or Brazil, whereas like, you know, so deep that there's serious competition in every spot. There just isn't. The top 20 kind of picks itself. The last 3 to 5 you can kind of debate back and forth. So it is about what you'd expect considering all of the injuries. There's no, oh my God, we didn't expect this picks, which is fine. I mean, this is not, the roster is the roster, and I don't see it changing too dramatically. I can see it changing at the fringes between now and 2026, but I don't see it changing that dramatically. The challenge for Pochettino is going to be, well, how do we get the most out of this group of players? What up, guys? I'm Pete Douthit, host of the 11 Yanks Show. We talk about all things American soccer, particularly the men's side of American soccer. If you're new, smash subscribe. The next 2 years are going to be really exciting, guys, as we go into the 2026 World Cup with Pochettino and staff at the helm. If you are not new and you've been here before, smash that like button. Leave a comment with your thoughts on the roster, and let's get into this. A couple of things before we dive into the actual roster itself. Pochettino did say a few things in the press conference that I think are important. One, he talked about formation. A lot of us are like, well, what formation is Pochettino going to use? Speculation. He said that, for now, we're looking at a 4-2-3-1 and a 4-3-3. So my guess is that means if we have like a Gio Reyna or a Malik Tillman available, it might be more of a 4-2-3-1. Maybe if we don't have a pure creative 10 available, it might be more of a 4-3-3. So we'll see what happens in this camp. We don't have Gio Reyna, who's still injured, but we do have Tillman and potentially Busio, who can also play there. Aronson can also play there too, although for me, I'm not really a big fan of him as a creative player, more of an interrupter in midfield. So that was interesting. He talked a lot about, well, he said two things. One, he talked about simplicity. I think it was Ron Blum from the Associated Press who asked him, what are you going to say to the players on the first day? And he said, listen, our message to them on day one is going to be very simple, right? We don't want to sit down for 2 or 3 hours and talk about tactics, which was quite an interesting departure from Greg Berhalter. But he talked about, we want to have a few very simple principles, and we want the players to enjoy. We want the players to be confident and, play with freedom is essentially what he was talking about, which is refreshing compared to, all of the stuff that we've seen over the last few years. To talk about players playing with a certain amount of freedom was refreshing to hear. So that's interesting. Of course, these are all words, right? This is all talk. We'll have to see what we look like on the field. But, it is interesting to kind of get an insight into what Pochettino was thinking. And the second thing, or the third thing, rather, he talked about was, we are going to have to play closer to the opponent's goal in order to have success, which absolutely matches up with Pochettino's time everywhere, right? He is always played a very high line. And when you play a very high line, you absolutely have to have extreme pressure on the ball, because if you don't, you can get cut wide open very, very quickly. Playing a high line is risky for several reasons. Pace. None of our center backs are very fast. They're just not. So recovery runs, if the ball gets played in behind, are going to be interesting to see how he deals with that. The only guy who's actually has some speed is Miles Robinson, who's in this roster. The problem with Robinson is he does not at all fit the way Pochettino wants to play on the ball, right? So it'll be interesting to see how he juggles that. Tim Ream, Mark McKenzie, we'll talk about the roster in just a second, but he did say we will have to play closer to the opponent's goal, and we have to be very, very, very demanding. That's a quote. Three varies, demanding about when we lose the ball, how quickly we need to win it back. So expect a lot of pressing, expect a fierce intensity to win that ball back, which you absolutely have to do. Because if you're playing a very high line and you don't have pressure on the ball, you're going to be cut open like a knife through butter. So it's going to be interesting to see how this actually works in practice and, which players that benefits. But I think the message has been clear and the gauntlet has been thrown down to the players that if you want to play in Pochettino's system, you better get ready to work. And so that's going to be interesting to see how that works in practice and which players maybe benefit from it, like a Brendan Aronson. I don't know if he's going to benefit from that, but he's a guy who on the ball offers not much, but work rate is definitely there. And then as opposed to a guy like Malik Tillman or Gio Reyna, who great creative players, maybe haven't always been known for their pressing and defensive work, although recently both have made, improvements in that regard. So we'll see how this actually works. Mikey Varas did say that, before he got injured, Gio Reyna was doing a lot of the pressing work that they wanted, and they were very, sad to see him go. So we'll see what happens when he comes back. But he's not in this roster. And let's bring up the roster now and just talk about it. All right, so first up, we have the goalkeepers, the position with the least certainty in the pool right now. And these four are about the four that you would, were kind of in contention, right? Matt Turner, Ethan Horvath, Zack Steffen, and Patrick Schulte. And none of these guys has made a strong case to start, right? Each of them has issues. Let's start with Matt Turner, right? The de facto number one under the Berhalter era for most of the Berhalter era. But, is not playing and hasn't been. And when he has played in the last 2 years, it's been pretty bad, including in the last friendlies that he played, for against New Zealand, where he got caught off his line off that goal that New Zealand scored. Ethan Horvath, terrible start with Cardiff City, has been benched even in the championship. You could really question, should he even be in the roster at all? Zack Steffen. Now, Steffen's an interesting one because Colorado fans would tell you how well he's played for them. The stats would say otherwise. Outside of Mickey Mouse tournaments like Leagues Cup, the stats aren't great on Zack Steffen. Now, what Zack Steffen has going for him is, of this group, he's probably the best with his feet. Pochettino also mentioned Zack Steffen by name, that he thought he wanted to give him an opportunity with this group. I don't know if that means he's going to get an opportunity to start or what have you. We have no idea what Pochettino's going to do. Or is he going to start different goalkeepers in each game, the same goalkeeper? Does everyone get 45 minutes? I'm just curious to see what Pochettino's going to do. Schulte probably has the strongest case. He's playing regularly for Columbus, mostly doing very well. Isn't great with his feet either, but in my opinion, better than Horvath and maybe Turner. Is younger, has made some errors, right? Including in the last game. I don't think he was great against Canada. No, let me be very clear. He was very good against Canada. He made a lot of good saves, except I think on the goal, he got caught with a wide stance and flat-footed, and I think he could have done better on Canada's first goal. Other than that, he also made some really nice saves, which is kind of how he did in the Olympics too, right? You had some great saves and then some not great moments from him. So even though I probably give him the edge right now, I don't think he has the strongest case either. Nobody does. And everyone's saying, where's Gaga? Guys, I really hope Gaga develops into something. But I've watched Gaga's, all of his, every moment that he's touched the ball or, every moment involving him this season for Barnsley in the third division, and he is not crushing it by any means. He makes terrible decisions at times. Positioning is not great. Has been responsible for at least 2 goals conceded, probably more actually. Isn't great with his feet. Has a deer in headlights look about him. And look, if you're playing in the third division of England and you want a national team call up, you better at least be balling out. He isn't. I don't think he's ready. Maybe he will be one day. And then people are going to say, but Pete, none of these guys are doing. Yeah, I know. I know. It's a problem, guys. I don't think Gaga should be called up. But, you could also make that argument for, some of these guys as well. So it's just not a great situation. And we're going to see how Poch handles this. My guess, and I could be dead wrong, is he gives Zack Steffen a game and he gives Patrick Schulte a game. But I have no idea. We'll see what Poch does. Let's move on to fullbacks. And these are essentially the fullbacks that you would probably bring considering the injuries, right? Joe Scally and Marlon Fossey at right back, which I think is good. Fossey impressed against New Zealand. Certainly, yes, it was New Zealand, but certainly enough to get more opportunities. And I'm glad that Poch sees it that way as well. And then at left back, you have Anthony Robinson, and the backup is currently Christopher Lund. We don't know if Wiley was considered. Wiley is injured right now, right? What we do know is, at least for now, Pochettino has Christopher Lund above John Tolkien, because those are really the 3 left backs competing for that left back backup spot, right? It's Lund, Wiley, and Tolkien. So as of now, in Pochettino's mind, Lund is ahead of Tolkien. Is he ahead of Wiley? We probably won't know until they're both available and see who he ends up calling in. I'm fine with it. Again, I don't have a strong preference between those three right now. A-Rob is the starter. Everybody else fighting for second. Let's see what happens. And then center backs. This is the second most debatable, or I guess uncertain position in the national team, which is kind of the opposite. Like if you look before, and we used to have great goalkeepers and pretty good center backs, whether it was a guy like Geoff Cameron or John Brooks, or even before that, guys like Eddie Pope or Gucci Onyewu. Even Carlos Bocanek, Greg Berhalter in his day wasn't a bad defender, right? So nowadays, however, the defending situation is not great, particularly when you have two guys like Chris Richards and Cameron Carter-Vickers out injured. So it's Mark McKenzie, Tim Ream, Miles Robinson, and Austin Trusty. Now, Mark McKenzie, let's start there. He said he watched Mark McKenzie play against Lyon, and, he thinks there's potential. So expect Mark McKenzie to get at least one start. Tim Ream just moved to Charlotte. I think we all think it's time to move on from Tim Ream, but right now there's not a lot of guys pushing him out. And also if you get injured, then that makes it easier for Tim Ream to stay in. He's probably going to be there for his leadership, and I'd probably even start him in at least one of the games. Austin Trusty made what, in my opinion, was not a good move, going to Celtic instead of staying in the Championship. And you could argue, yeah, Pete, but he's been playing. He's only playing because Cameron Carter-Vickers is injured. And anybody who watched him against Dortmund, it wasn't just the lack of quality that really bothered me with that Dortmund game. It was the lack of effort. There were two times where the ball was played in behind, and he didn't even really sprint to pressure. He sort of accepted that the ball, there was going to be a goal, particularly on the first and second goal. On the first goal, you could say he did nothing about it. It was slipped in behind. That is true. But I always want my center backs, even if they don't think they can get back in time, you go put pressure on the defender anyways, okay? Because if the defender feels you, the attacker, if the attacker feels you breathing down his neck, he's more likely, even if by a small margin, to scuff his shot or rush it or miss. The pressure matters. You always put pressure, even if you don't think you can get back in time. It's never a goal until it's a goal. And then he did that on the second goal as well. He didn't get tight enough to Adeyemi. He didn't put enough pressure on him. Look, it's Dortmund, okay? I don't think any of our defenders would look good against Dortmund. That's my honest truth. Maybe Mark. But the lack of effort for me was a little bit disturbing from Austin Trusty. But then again, what are our options right now, right? With Richards and CCV out, there aren't a lot of great options. So we'll see what happens. Miles, a quick, he's fast. He is fast in recovery. Other than that, 1v1 defending, not great. On the ball, not great. We'll see what Pochettino does with him. Maybe Pochettino can get something out of him that Berhalter couldn't. I don't know. But I have no problem with Miles being here, considering the various injuries. Let's see what Pochettino does with these guys. And it's sort of clean slate for everyone to a degree, right? It's a clean slate. How you perform for Berhalter may not matter so much to Pochettino. He wants to see how you're going to perform now. And so maybe Miles, we'll see what he does. Well, I'm not Miles' biggest fan, but he has an opportunity here to show Pochettino something and maybe the fan base something. Midfielders, Johnny Cardoso, Aidan Morris, Yunus Musa, Weston McKennie, Malik Tillman, and Gianluca Busio, which, again, considering the injuries, Adams is out, Gio is out, De La Torre is out. Although, even if De La Torre was healthy, I'm not sure he's ahead of any of these six guys right now. Johnny Cardoso and Aidan Morris are the sixes, I guess, in this system. Yunus Musa and Weston McKennie are the eights. Tillman and Busio are the tens, although Busio can also play as an eight. I've been really impressed with Gianluca Busio's start to the season for a Venezia team that, is not a great team going into Serie A, but he might have been one of their better players. That's certainly a top 2 or 3 player for them, so I'm glad that he gets that opportunity now. Aidan Morris showed well in the last camp and has been playing well for Middlesbrough. It's good to see. I'm glad he got out of his comfort zone in Columbus and is pushing himself. Musa McKennie is thriving once again with Juve. Juve fans are mad that he keeps getting starts. We'll see how he does in the Champions League today. It looks like he's probably going to start. And Malik has had a very strong start to the season with, PSV, including in the Champions League, because it's one thing to beat up on poor Eredivisie teams. We knew he could do that last season. Malik's issue was always against the better teams, he wouldn't show up. I actually thought that he looked okay yesterday against Sporting P. Okay, actually better than okay. I actually thought he looked good against Sporting CP. So Sporting Lisbon, I'm sorry, in the Champions League. So maybe he gets a chance. I certainly hope he does. With Gio out, he has a chance to stake a claim for that number 10 spot, and I hope he gets it. Maybe if I were Poch, I'd maybe give Tillman one, game at the 10 and maybe Busio the other, right? Or half and half. We'll see. But this is about the midfield you'd expect, and it'll be interesting to see what combinations he uses, whether in a 4-3-3 or a 4-2-3-1. Wide forwards are wide forwards. There isn't any competition, especially considering that both Kevin Paredes and Griffin Yao are out injured. Christian Pulisic, Haji Wright, Brendan Aronson, and Tim Weah. Although Brendan Aronson is actually listed as a midfielder in the roster. And, Poch did mention he does think he's more of a central player. So we'll see how he is used. He's versatile. I think Aronson is here because he likes to press. And Pochettino likes that about him too. So we'll see how he uses him. Obviously, Pulisic, Haji, Weah's just coming back from injury. So it looks like he just made it. We'll see if he's on the bench today for Juve. Not much to say about this group. It's about what you'd expect. And then here you go. You have Fuller and Balogun, Ricardo Pepi, and Josh Sargent, who are our clear top 3 strikers right now. For me, Balogun is the starter, and we'll see how he uses him. And we'll see how he uses Pepi and Sargent. And, all of them are making a claim now, which is great. For a long time, striker was a big weakness for us, and you could say, well, Pete, none of them are really doing it in a top 4 league. That is true. But guys, the last time, we've never had a striker crushing it in a top 4 league since Clint Dempsey's 2 seasons, right? For Fulham 1 year and then a little bit for Tottenham the following year. That was early, 2012, 13. Since then, we've not really had a top 5 league striker crushing it anywhere. So, yeah, at least Balogun has been doing it in a top 5 league, right? And 2 goals in his last 2 games. Pepe's scoring when he gets his chance. Sargent is on fire for Norwich. Sargent needs to stay healthy, though, because every single camp, before the camp, he gets injured. And then in camp, he gets injured. Dude, you're not making strong case for yourself. And people's argument against Sargent, which is a fair one, is he hasn't scored for the national team for 5 years. That's fair. His form for his club certainly warrants a call-up. But of course, at some point, he has to start delivering for the national team. Now, you could say, well, he also hasn't been called up most of the time for 5 years. That is also true, right? At the World Cup, he was the starter. But if you look at most of World Cup qualifying, Sargent was left off roster after roster, sometimes because of injury, sometimes because he was essentially playing as a wingback for Norwich in the Premier League. And, Berhalter preferred others. So we'll see. Does he stay healthy? Who does Poch rate? How does he rate them? I still think Balogun offers the most for this team. But it's nice to know that we have 2 very capable and solid backups. I think people ask me sometimes, and some people think Sargent should start, but some people ask me about the comparison between Pepi and Sargent. I think that Pepi is a better pure finisher than Sargent, but I think that overall Sargent is the better player. Sargent's hold-up play, his combination play, his speed, dribbling, those are things that Pepi doesn't have as much in his locker. He can hold the ball up, but he can't dribble at speed, certainly under pressure, Pepi. He also doesn't get many assists, right? He's a sort of a pure poacher, pure finisher, which is fine. That's, his job. I think overall Sargent is more versatile as a striker who can also play wing, can play the 10, but I think he's a more well-rounded player. So let's see what happens, guys. This is Pochettino's first roster. Let me know your thoughts in the comments about it. Is there anybody that was egregiously left out? You could make an argument for Tanner Tessman, but he's not in the Europa League roster this Thursday. So I don't know, maybe he has a knock, or maybe they want to leave him there to just focus on his club. You could maybe make an argument for Leonard Maloney. Probably could. But again, if you don't see him as a center back, who's he fighting with at the 6? Johnny Morris. I would love to see Maloney, but I also don't think it's an egregious miss by Pochettino, and this is his first roster. Let's see what it looks like. It's exciting. I'm very curious to see how the players are going to respond to him and how that ends up translating onto the field. So this has gone on long enough. Smash the like button before you go. Thank you to Believe, by the way, to Bet Online for sponsoring this video. You all have a great rest of your day. I'll talk to you all soon.